Emily was running late. As she weaved through the bustling streets of downtown, she couldn't help but feel the day was already slipping through her fingers. The sharp chime of her phone vibrating in her pocket was the only thing that broke through her fog of grogginess. Her boss, Greg, was calling. "Emma." Greg's voice crackled on the other end, sounding almost cartoonishly shrill over the crackle of static. "I've been waiting for 15 minutes. You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself before I reconsider your position here." Emma groaned, barely dodging a bicycle messenger whizzing past her. 5 seconds? Seriously, Greg? "I'm on my way," she shouted into the phone as she dodged a pedestrian's erratic step. The city streets were chaotic as usual, and her heels weren't helping. "Just a minute." She stopped mid-sentence as a strange electric hum vibrated through the air, making her skin prickle. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "What the hell?" She paused, looking around. A swirling disturbance rippled through the atmosphere like the air had turned to liquid, blurring the outlines of nearby buildings. At first, she thought it was just the city's usual chaos, another light fixture flickering out, a nearby construction site causing a small tremor. But then it was more. Something was wrong. And that's when she saw it. A woman, no, another version of herself, was walking briskly toward her. She looked identical, with the same dark brown eyes and sleek black hair, but there was something different. The woman was dressed in tactical armor, glowing softly as if powered by an energy source Emma had never seen before. She held a sleek, glowing weapon in one hand and, this was the weirdest part, she smiled at Emma, as if they had already met. For a second, their eyes locked. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The stranger's face was filled with a knowing that made Emma feel strangely unsettled. Before Emma could even open her mouth to say anything, the woman turned, melting into the crowd with a speed that was impossible to follow. The hum of energy dissipated, leaving Emma standing there, alone, at the mercy of the busy city. "What the hell was that?" she muttered aloud, already scrambling to put her phone back to her ear. "Emma!" Greg barked from the other end. "Do I have to find a replacement for you? I don't want to hear excuses. Get in here." "I'm sorry, Emma's voice faltered. She still couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. Something strange. She snapped back to reality and broke into a run, cursing herself for getting distracted. By the time she reached her office, she was breathless, disheveled, and just on time to hear Greg's gruff voice shouting through the door, "You're late." Again. Inside the office, Emma tried her best to shake off the odd encounter. "Maybe I'm just tired," she reasoned. It had been a long week of back-to-back projects, client demands, and early morning meetings. The truth was, the energy storm had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. She'd brushed it off as nothing, but the feeling persisted. That strange, undeniable sense of something lingering behind her consciousness. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with Emma pushing the incident out of her mind. She sat in the morning meeting, nodding politely as Greg went over their marketing stats for the week. By noon, she was hunched over her computer, sending emails, updating spreadsheets, and pretending nothing unusual had happened. That was until the memory hit her. It came out of nowhere, a sharp, sudden flash of images. Blood, fire, the distant sounds of battle. A woman, another version of herself, fighting, leaping into action with a fluidity that took Emma by surprise. And then, a strange, foreign feeling seeped into her mind. Emma had never felt this before. A flood of memories, not her own, rushed in, a version of herself standing on a battlefield, a version sitting at a desk reading something deeply distressing, a version laughing with a group of people she didn't recognize. In that moment, Emma realized something far beyond the ordinary was happening. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. A pulse of heat spread through her chest. She felt a rush of power, an unfamiliar energy, as though the memories of these other versions of herself were becoming her own. The strange sensation overwhelmed her, like another person's soul was trying to invade her body. But no, This wasn't an invasion. This was something else. Emma stood up quickly, grabbing her bag and heading out of the office. She had to get some air, process what was happening. By the time she found herself on a park bench nearby, the dizziness was unbearable. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. What's going on? When she opened her eyes again, she saw her, the same woman from earlier, the one who had looked like her. Only now, she was standing just a few feet away, watching Emma with a quiet intensity. She wore the same tactical outfit, but she had a different air about her. This version of Emma looked weary, battle-hardened, as if she'd lived through something long and grueling. You're feeling it, aren't you? The woman spoke softly, but there was a commanding edge to her voice. Emma's mouth went dry. Who are you? Emma barely managed to whisper, her pulse racing. Her mind was spinning, her body unnervingly aware of the stranger standing before her. It was like this woman wasn't just someone she didn't know, she was someone Emma had once been. Someone who should know her. The woman smiled, stepping closer. I'm you. Or, rather, one of the many versions of you that exist in parallel worlds. Each time you encounter danger or your own limits, you have the ability to merge with us. To take our memories, our powers. Merge with you? Emma blinked, confused. What are you talking about? The woman nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. You've already begun. Each time you're under stress, or in battle, you tap into your other selves. And it's not just memories you gain, abilities. Strength. The power to do things you never thought possible. Emma's thoughts spiraled. She didn't know how to process what she was hearing, but the reality of the situation was becoming clearer with every word. How? How could this be happening? Your identity, Emma, the woman continued, it's beginning to blur. With every merger, you lose a piece of yourself. But that's the price of power. I didn't come to warn you, though. I came because you need to understand, if you don't control it, if you don't keep yourself in check, you'll become nothing but a fractured version of yourself. Emma shook her head. I don't understand. The woman's eyes softened, a touch of sympathy breaking through her hardened demeanor. It's not too late to stop it. But it's a dangerous game. You'll need to choose. Stay as you are, or merge, and become someone else. With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as effortlessly as she had appeared. Emma stood there, struggling to hold on to the ground beneath her, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. As Emma sat at her desk, the hum of fluorescent lights above her felt strangely oppressive. She tried to push the thoughts from her mind, but every time she focused, the memories returned, creeping into her consciousness like unwanted guests. It wasn't just fleeting visions anymore. These memories were persistent, real. They made her heart race, her palms sweat. The feelings attached to them were so vivid that they left her breathless. One moment, she was a soldier, aiming a rifle across a battlefield. The next, she was a scientist, hunched over a desk, feverishly scribbling calculations. And worse still, some of the memories didn't even feel like her. She could still hear the woman's voice echoing in her mind, warning her that each of these mergers came with a price. A price she was beginning to pay. Emma closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. The headache was growing unbearable. It wasn't just the voices, though, it was the weight of these memories. They weren't just pieces of someone else's life, they felt like fragments of her own life that had been torn away and replaced with something else. I have to stop this. I can't lose myself. She quickly grabbed her coat and left the office, walking aimlessly through the streets, trying to shake off the sensations that were quickly overtaking her. The world outside felt distant, as though she was no longer fully connected to it. She was losing grip on what was real. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her spiral. She didn't need to check who it was, she could already guess. Greg, yeah, she answered, forcing her voice to sound casual, though it trembled slightly. Emma, I need you to focus. We've got a big presentation tomorrow, and you're dropping the ball. You're slipping, and if you don't pull it together, I'm sorry, Greg, she interrupted, her voice small. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't think I can make it in tomorrow. Emma, Greg's voice softened for a second, his annoyance turning into something almost close to concern. Look, you're good at what you do. But I can't cover for you forever. I know, Emma whispered. I'll get it together. I just need some time. She hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Her mind swirled with questions, with doubts, but there was one thing that kept resurfacing: the woman in the park. The one who had told her that she was merging with her other selves. And now, here she was, struggling to hold on to her own identity. Emma knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed answers. But where could she turn? Who could possibly help her understand what was happening? Dr. Lydia Kincaid. The name flickered in her mind like a beacon. Dr. Kincaid, the eccentric quantum physicist she had met at a science conference a few months ago. She had been talking about parallel dimensions and multiverses, things that had sounded insane at the time. But now, after everything that had been happening, it all made a twisted kind of sense. With a sudden burst of determination, Emma pulled out her phone and searched for Dr. Kincaid's contact information. After a few seconds, she found it. She hesitated for a moment before dialing. It rang for several seconds before a voice answered. Dr. Kincaid? Yes, came the brisk reply, sharp and expectant. Dr. Kincaid, my name is Emily. We met at the Multiverse Theory Conference a few months ago. I need your help. Something's happening to me, and I think it has to do with what you were talking about. Merging with alternate versions of myself. There was a pause on the other end. Emma could almost hear the wheels turning as Dr. Kincaid processed the information. Meet me at the lab, Dr. Kincaid finally said. Tonight, 9 p.m. Don't be late. The lab was located in an old building on the outskirts of town, nestled in a quieter part of the city. Emma's car screeched to a halt in front of the large, industrial building. The neon lights from a nearby sign reflected eerily off the windows, casting strange shadows on the ground. Emma felt a sense of unease settle deep in her gut as she approached the entrance, but she steeled herself. She needed answers, and this was her only chance. When she entered the building, the smell of old books and metal filled her nose, a sharp contrast to the sterile cleanliness of her office. Dr. Kincaid was waiting by a large metal door at the back of the building. She didn't seem surprised to see Emma there. In fact, she almost looked expectant, like she knew Emma would come. You made it, Dr. Kincaid said, her tone cool and professional. I don't know what's happening to me, Emma said, her voice almost pleading. I've been merging with other versions of myself. And I don't know how to stop it. I can't control it anymore. It's like I'm losing myself. Dr. Kincaid raised an eyebrow. You've been merging. Interesting. She led Emma into the back room, where strange machines whirred quietly. A large screen on the far wall displayed complex graphs and equations that Emma couldn't begin to understand. Have a seat, Dr. Kincaid instructed, gesturing to a chair beside one of the machines. Let's see what we're working with. As Emma sat down, she couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but she was desperate enough to cling to any shred of hope. Dr. Kincaid attached small electrodes to Emma's temples, her hands moving swiftly and precisely. We're going to run some tests, she explained. I need to understand what's happening in your brain. You're clearly experiencing some sort of dimensional overlap. The merging you've described is rare, but it has been recorded in theoretical studies. If we can identify the exact mechanism, we might be able to reverse it. Emma swallowed hard, her anxiety rising. Reverse it? You can do that? Dr. Kincaid didn't respond immediately. She typed rapidly on a nearby keyboard, watching the screen closely. Then, after a few minutes, she turned back to Emma. it's not that simple. There's a lot we don't understand. But I have a theory. The reason you're merging with other versions of yourself is because of a tear in the fabric of spacetime. It's a quantum anomaly, and you're somehow connected to it. What's happening to you is like an echo of infinite versions of your consciousness. You're tethered to those other worlds, and every time you experience stress or danger, you pull in a version of yourself from another reality. Emma's heart raced. But why? Why me? I believe you've triggered this connection somehow. You might have done it unconsciously, or there could be something in your genetic makeup that makes you uniquely susceptible to this kind of merge. Can you fix it? Emma asked desperately. Can you make it stop? Dr. Kincaid looked at Emma for a long moment. I'm not sure. But I'm going to try. The hours ticked by as Dr. Kincaid worked, adjusting the machines and running diagnostics. Emma's head was spinning. Every test felt like another step deeper into an unknown world, a place where the lines between reality and imagination had blurred beyond recognition. She had no idea what was happening to her, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she had someone who might be able to help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Kincaid turned to her with a look of grim determination. I've found something, she said. There's a way to anchor your consciousness. If we can stabilize your connection to this multiverse, you might be able to control the merging process. It's dangerous, though. If we don't do it right, you could lose yourself entirely. Emma stared at her, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. This was it. Her last chance. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she had to make a choice. Would she continue to let the other versions of herself flood in and take over? Or would she fight to retain her own identity? She didn't have much time. The process would be risky, but the alternative was far worse. I'm ready, Emma said, her voice firm. Let's do it. The cold, sterile air in the lab seemed to tighten around Emma as Dr. Kincaid moved swiftly, adjusting the machines with practiced precision. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she sat in the chair, the electrode still attached to her temples, her mind racing. The idea of potentially losing herself entirely was terrifying, but the alternative, the constant confusion, the sense of being pulled in 1,000 different directions, was worse. She didn't want to keep losing control. Not like this. Doctor. Kincaid gave a nod of approval as she finished her final adjustments. I'm setting up the quantum stabilizers. This will synchronize your neural pathways with the multiple realities you're connected to. If we do it correctly, it will act as a tether, a way to keep you grounded in your own identity. The scientist's voice was calm, but Emma could detect the undercurrent of urgency in it. She knew that if this didn't work, Emma's world could collapse entirely. Her body might be fine, but her mind? It was a different story altogether. Are you ready? Dr. Kincaid asked, turning to Emma. Emma nodded, though her stomach churned. I think so. Dr. Kincaid activated the device, and the room seemed to hum with an almost palpable energy. The machines buzzed to life, and the lights flickered overhead. Emma could feel a shift in the air around her, like something was moving just beyond her reach. She focused on her breathing, trying to steady her mind, but it was hard. Suddenly, her vision blurred. At first, it was subtle, a soft, dreamlike quality that made her feel lightheaded. But then it intensified. Her surroundings began to fragment, like shards of glass breaking apart and shifting in all directions. Each shard was a piece of her, each fragment holding a version of herself that she had merged with. She saw herself again, older, stronger, standing in the midst of a fierce battle, the air crackling with energy. Another version of herself was sitting in a lab, hunched over, scribbling down calculations frantically. And another version, younger and full of laughter, sat at a coffee shop, chatting with friends as though everything was normal. But then, there was a flash, a violent, crushing feeling that slammed into her chest. The shards of herself began to come together, colliding into each other, fusing with brutal force. It felt like her mind was splitting in two, each piece of her fighting for control. Focus, Emma thought. Focus on yourself. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the chaos. In that moment, she could feel her other selves trying to dominate her consciousness, their emotions, their fears, their memories all demanding attention. Each one shouted louder than the last, as if they were all trying to drown her out. But she held on. She clenched her fists, feeling her muscles tense as she anchored herself to the one thing she knew for sure, her name. Emily. She didn't know how long it took, but eventually, the cacophony began to fade. The pieces of her mind, the memories of her other selves, began to fall into place. She could feel them, all of them, but they no longer had the same pull. She wasn't just a collection of fragments. She was whole. She was herself. The world snapped back into focus. The lights stopped flickering. The humming in the air quieted. Emma opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light of the lab. Dr. Kincaid was standing in front of her, watching intently. Did it work? Emma swallowed, still trying to collect her thoughts. She could still feel the weight of her other selves, those memories, those experiences, but they no longer controlled her. She felt whole. Like her true self had reclaimed the space that had been overtaken. I think it worked, Emma said softly, her voice steady, though it still carried the weight of the experience. I feel like myself again. Dr. Kincaid nodded, a small smile of relief crossing her face. Good. That's a good sign. It means the tether held. You're not lost in the multiverse anymore. Emma stood up from the chair, her legs a little unsteady, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. But what happens now? Will I keep merging with other versions of myself? Dr. Kincaid's expression grew more serious. That's the tricky part. You'll still be connected to the other dimensions, Emma. You can't fully sever those links. But now you'll have control. You can choose when, if ever, you merge with another version of yourself. You're not at the mercy of random chance anymore. Do you think this is permanent? Emma asked, her voice laced with concern. Or will I keep losing control? There's always a risk, Dr. Kincaid said carefully. But with time and focus, you'll be able to regulate it. You've got a lot of strength in you, Emma. The fact that you didn't lose yourself completely proves that. But you'll need to be careful. Every time you merge, it will change you. And you'll need to ask yourself, what part of you do you want to keep? What part of you do you want to lose? Emma nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of Dr. Kincaid's words. She had already seen how quickly things could slip away from her. The more she merged, the more she lost herself. But now, she knew how to hold on. She could be her own anchor. What do I do next? Emma asked, her voice stronger now. Go back to your life, Dr. Kincaid said with a thoughtful expression. You'll need to adjust to the new normal. But don't ignore the other versions of you. They're part of you. Just remember that you are the one in control. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days settle within her. She wasn't just Emma Lee anymore. She was more. And maybe that was the key, finding a way to integrate all the parts of herself, without losing the essence of who she truly was. The drive back home felt surreal. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, how her ability to merge would shape her life, or what challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she was certain of one thing: she would not lose herself again. Not completely. She pulled into her apartment parking lot, the familiar sound of her tires crunching over gravel grounding her back into reality. The city was alive around her, the lights shining brightly against the night sky. It felt normal. It felt real. She stepped out of the car, her footsteps steady as she walked toward her front door. The weight of the day, of everything she had just experienced, was heavy on her shoulders. But as she turned the key in the lock and entered her apartment, she felt a flicker of peace. She had faced the chaos. She had found her way through it. And now, she was finally ready to live her life again, on her own terms. Inside, her apartment was quiet. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, the dim light from the street lamps outside casting shadows on the floor. It was the kind of quiet that used to make her uneasy. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, she felt comfortable in her own skin. Emma sat down on her couch, pulling her legs up beneath her. She glanced at the small coffee table in front of her, where an old book she had been meaning to read was still resting. She smiled, reaching for it. The weight of the past few days was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. It was just part of her story. And she was still the author of that story. As she opened the book, a calm settled over her. She didn't need to be afraid anymore. The other versions of herself, the powers she could tap into, they were all a part of her. But they didn't define her. She was Emma Lee. And she was going to be just fine.